Hi, welcome to Tales from the Sky Lounge. It's a podcast about business, consulting, and venture investing. We get out there in the world and we talk to people who are making it happen and get their stories. And if you could like and subscribe, it really helps us get our message out. So today we have a special treat in the Sky Lounge. We have a panel of very smart AI machine learning people. So hello, Joel, Nick, and Kevin. It's good to have you here on the Sky Lounge.
Hey, Todd, good to be
Good to be here.
Yeah. Joel, why don't you start us off and tell us a little bit about you and what you're working on?
Sure. Hi, I'm Joel Forman, Director of AI at Airworks. So Airworks is a company that works on making sense of kind of the world around us, from overhead imagery, LiDAR, and all sorts of other different data streams. We largely work in the construction and telco industry, along with some government work. So most of what I'm up to lately is getting overhead imagery and then trying to draw blueprints automatically from it with AI, and trying to do 3D stuff with that as well. And I guess a little bit more about me. I went to University of Michigan. That's where I got my PhD in mechanical engineering, focused on control systems. Spent 7 years in consulting after that, doing a bunch of different things with some machine learning on microscopes for product defects, and spent 1.5 years with a defense contractor, doing more machine learning, trying to make radar see farther, among other things. And I've been there works about 2.5 years.
Nick, why don't you tell us a little bit about who you are and what you're working on?
Thank you, Todd. My name is Nikolaos Vasiloglou, also known as Nick the Greek. So I've been here in Atlanta for 15 years, 24 years, actually, now that I'm thinking about 15 years in the business domain. I got my PhD from Georgia Tech way back, and I've worked, in different sectors. I started building machine learning software those days. I've worked in forecasting systems, a lot in cybersecurity and online advertisement. I'm the VP of Research ML of RelationalAI, also known as the Knowledge Graph Coprocessor for Snowflake. I also hold an advisory role for a small services company in Greece, independently. And I spend a lot of time participating in conferences and trying to find out what's the next thing that is going to be big in the enterprise world.
Kevin, who are you? And tell us a little bit about what you've been working
on. Sure thing. I'm a partner at TechCXO. Sort of my history is came up through the ranks as a developer. I started writing code as a kid, 12 years old or something like that. So just fell in love with it and, kind of stayed on that path, but came up through the ranks as a developer, cutting my teeth mostly on C, C++, the assembly language back in those days. Took my first CTO role in 1999 and have held 4 since then. Joined TechCXO as a partner in late 2018 and have worked with a number of companies as CTO, CISO, and just as an advisor on the tech side as well. On the ML side of things, I started doing a lot of work with machine learning back in 2014, 15, specific to e-commerce. Branched out from there and currently continuing to do machine learning work in healthcare, in financial services, in fintech, and then also getting very involved in the AI buzz that's going on right now. But yeah, that's my background.
So Kevin, since you mentioned it, AI is a buzzword right now. It's kind of like hot sauce with marketing. You put on a little bit on everything. Is AI the same thing as machine learning in the world right now?
Technically, no, but I'll defer to the 2 doctors we have on the call. Machine learning is a subset to me, right? And it's more classical, like it's statistical approach to developing models that can find things out about data, whereas AI is more geared towards being able to do things intelligently like a human would. And I think we've seen things come pretty close with some of the large language models out there, but there's so much buzz and hype, frankly, around AI at this point that it's hard to tell unless you look under the covers if it really exists or if it's just a bunch of conditional logic, right? So I'm sure some of you have maybe seen the meme where, somebody's pulling the cover off of AI. It's like a Scooby-Doo thing, right? And underneath the cover is just a bunch of if statements. So I kind of, look, every time there's a new technology that hits, this happens, right? It happened with blockchain, happened with microservices, happened back in the day with client server, right? So this is a natural sort of occurring thing, but there's so few people that understand how this stuff actually works under the covers that it's a really ripe environment for people to be misunderstood or to misrepresent what's actually happening. I do think there's some really innovative stuff going on right now, but overall, I think we have to be careful about what we buy into and what our expectations are for AI. And just one more thing on that point, I talked to a number of CEOs of my clients that are under the impression that certain things can happen and they're automatic with AI because of all the stuff that's out there that they're reading, and it's just not the case, right? So I think part of our responsibility is education and helping people understand what is possible with current models that are commercially available or foundational models that you can download from different places and build on top of, versus what is sort of what's the hype, right? And what should they look at to in order to have a practical application of AI?
Yeah, I think there's a lot to unpack there. So maybe defer on the is LLM actually intelligent, but stick with the AI as a marketing buzzword. I had a client that has a product manager who's very uncomfortable. He's a technical guy that grew up in the software end of the business. He's uncomfortable with the term AI being used to describe what they're doing, which is intelligent statistical regression in modeling, not traditional ML. So what do you? Joel, Nick, what do you guys think? Where's the line? Kind of what's fair? What do you tell that kid that's struggling with like this feels bad, right?
Yeah, Todd, I think it depends who you're talking to. I think with how everything is today, we use AI as like this huge umbrella to sort of explain what we're doing. Like anytime we're having a computer extract data in some automatic fashion and try to make sense of it, we're kind of calling that AI. But like within that, obviously there's machine learning, and that's a very specific branch of it. And what Airworks does is we're focused largely on computer vision, like can we find objects, can we label where buildings are, and that type of stuff. And then there's a whole section after that where we're trying to figure out how to draw lines there. And a lot of that's much more traditional type stuff. Like once we know where the pave mark line pixels are, like how do we put the lines on it? And that type stuff, I think traditionally I wouldn't call it AI, but the way the world is right now, we kind of do call it AI. I think anytime you're extracting data from things and making sense of it, I think where things are right now, it's fair to call it that. Now, if you're doing regression and you're saying, hey, I have a machine learning AI company, maybe that's a little bit too much hype, but I think it's fair if you're doing anything that's making sense of data to call it AI in this case. Now, I'm not going to get into the philosophy of like general intelligence AI and all that type of stuff, right? But I think it's fair. I think engineers tend to undersell what they do, even when they're trying to oversell it. And I think like the engineering marketing interaction is part of what's just playing out there.
So maybe fair, and maybe it's also okay to feel a little bit weird about it, but that's just the world we live in.
I think as long as the person you're talking to knows that you're using it as an umbrella term, then it's okay. I think if they're confused and you're using it to confuse them more, that's probably where the line is. It's where I would draw it. Everybody put it somewhere different.
Nick, what do you think?
So I like looking things from a historical perspective. So, 50, 60 years ago when the field started as artificial intelligence, basically you can claim that learning is part of intelligence. In the beginning, they used to call it pattern recognition, which is also the one side of intelligence. The other side, obviously, is emotional intelligence. But there is also the synthesis, the generation, generative, like that's what we're living right now, which we didn't have it for a long time. Now, when we started doing AI, we took the symbolic approach. And the idea was to do basically reasoning. Basically, that's the big thing. That's what we always wanted, even from from the business domain, business logic. Everything started with the expert systems where people tried to model the world with logic and rules. And I bet you a lot of people don't know about this company called Psych, which 20 years ago, maybe even more, they tried to build a logical model of the world, create all the facts. Basically, they tried to do what GPT, OpenAI language model was doing, but they did it in a very handmade way, rule by rule, ontologies, all that stuff, one by one, and that didn't work. So the community took a step back and said, well, let's start, with something simpler, like can we recognize if it's A or B classification? And the big step over there was like we learned about statistical learning. That was the big thing. And that's what we call machine learning. It's basically the birth of statistical learning. Now, as we push statistics and data and architectures to the extreme, we arrived at the language models that eventually were able to do reasoning. That is the fundamental leap and change. At the beginning, Joel mentioned about computer vision. We were able to recognize images, deep learning, like better algorithms, still statistical learning, still a classifier. But now the modern architecture and, extra compute, extra scale, get us to the point that we're still learning statistically. The language models learn in a statistical way, but they have the ability to reason. That was the biggest, in my opinion, breakthrough. So yes, if you're using linear regression, you're doing traditional, statistical analysis, statistical learning. I wouldn't call it. You are like in a very small subdomain of AI. It's not really the big thing.
Well, just to jump off that, I mean, you mentioned like some of these models are actually doing reasoning. So a lot of people, the counter argument is, hey, it's just predicting the next token statistically, so it's a pretty parrot, it generates beautiful language that mimics what's out there on the internet a lot of times. How do you guys think about these new LLM, this generative technology? Is it truly, reasoning? Does it have insights? Is it limited? Or is it just kind of copying what's already out there in the world?
If I can start, can I start?
Yeah, please.
Okay, so even if it's, I don't know how you call this. Let's look at it from a business perspective. If you can win math Olympiads and you can solve problems and you can solve geometry, even if you are a parrot, you're a very smart parrot. That's one thing. So if you just say that in a derogatory way, it doesn't really matter from a business perspective. It can solve problems. People can't, a lot of people, average people, wouldn't be able to do that. That's the first thing. The second thing is we've done the analysis and we do know that it has started, people have taken the layers of the language model and they've seen that it had learned the grammar, the syntax. It tries to find out, subject, object, and the verb and all that stuff. So yeah, for sure it does. It has learned some reasoning patterns. For that, we are now. Has it learned it the proper way? Is it still making mistakes? Is it very efficient? We also know the answer to that. It's really shocking because you can actually create artificially a BERT model, a language model that it's supposed to know solve the problem exactly. And as you keep training it, you see that it starts drifting and it can still solve the problem, but it learns something completely different. So, from a business perspective, it doesn't matter if you call it a parrot, but it's definitely, we know that it definitely has reasoning power. It learned some very strong reasoning patterns. So that we can be sure.
I'm mostly in computer vision, so I'm not doing much with language models, but we kind of internally, we use them for like ideation. Like sometimes you'll ask it a question and be like, can you list off other things about this? Or can you come up with different ideas? And sometimes it's helpful and sometimes it isn't, but it's kind of a good way to get more things to look at. I think one of the things I like about them is just that they have so much stuff that they've looked at least, right? So like when you're trying to go through Google and look at different documents and different, I'm totally in coding world, right? Look at through different documents and things like that. You might not think of other things that are out there and it might, suggest them. The flip side of that is I've had one of my engineers was, using it and asking it some questions. And it's like, oh yeah, I came up with this library that I should use for this stuff. It's like, the library doesn't exist, right?
Oh no. Okay.
So it's like, it's like, here's some code. Here's how you use it. This would solve your problems. And it's like, oh, and then it goes to install. It's like, no one's made this. So
Okay.
that kind of stuff can happen too, right? And then I think maybe on pattern recognition, there are different things where they talk about chess players, and the chess, like when you look at it from afar, it's supposed to be like this high order reasoning type thing, but they oftentimes talk about like grandmasters. It's a lot of just like incredibly fast pattern recognition that they think people are doing to do it, right? So even then, like I think there's a lot of, much like the parrot comment, like there's a lot of value in being able to do pattern recognition really fast, right, over a wide area of things. Is it intelligence? Is it consciousness? No, but like it's useful.
Yeah.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think it's very useful. I mean, I think that LLMs are essentially the new search mechanism, right? I mean, they've, as long as you're not looking for anything new that they haven't been trained on, I think it's advantageous to, ask an LLM about a topic first before you start trying to piece together things with a typical web search. Also agree with Joel that there's some very useful tasks that can be performed with LLMs, data analysis tasks. Just recently, I was showing a client how they could use an LLM to determine the best way to schedule things with multiple people, and it was one of those moments where it was like, kind of a jaw hit the floor kind of thing that the person had no idea this was even possible. So I think I think they're useful. Definitely have changed the way a lot of people work. On the flip side of that, though, Todd, what I'm concerned about is that we're moving into an area where it's seen as knowledge instead of information, and I think that's the risk in over reliance on LLMs.
So, the way I describe it, and you guys tell me if you think this is fair, is if you had a pretty new, college freshman intern that is really getting after it, high energy, is going to go Google the crap out of something and bring you back a lot of information, and has no idea what it is, but here's a list of stuff. Do we feel like that's kind of the level of functioning, or is it more or less than that?
I think no. It's actually a different angle to say that. To me, people, you might have seen people talking about the thinking fast and slow, the two systems of thinking. For me, the language models actually can be, well, it depends on the size. Yes, if it's a small language model, you can think about it as a graduate. But the language model is more like the creative guy in the room. Okay, someone, as you said, who said, "Oh, I could solve the problem if only I had this library," as Joel mentioned, and say, "Well, assume I have it." Or it can come up with something, and sometimes people are harsh to say, "Oh, it's hallucinating," or "It doesn't know." No, it behaves exactly like it has been trained. It has been trained on human data produced by human. So it's kind of like, it is creative. It gives you something, and you can play with the temperature, and that something can be very creative. But you do it the slow thinking, the symbolic word, the knowledge graph. That's the area that I work in, or the verifier, which is going to come back and say, that library doesn't exist. Go find another one. Just go and do a search and find actually the library, and the interplay between them. So you can think as the creative guy and the more like rule follower, someone who is is more rigorous. So it puts credibility on the works.
Most not talking about LLMs, they're talking about computer vision. We have you can make a thing where it can find buildings well, it can find manholes well, but sometimes it'll find something that looks like a manhole and it's on a building, and like a person knows that it's not there, but like the models, they aren't always talking to each other, and they don't know that. So there's oftentimes this need to like put verification or rules in place on it. But yeah, that's just my lens through. It's all about images and whatnot with me.
Yeah.
As much on the LLM side.
Well, and so maybe we should talk about like the guardrails we ought to put on this, mentally or actually in practice. What how do we think about this, and then how do we back this obviously useful new technology or technology with some kind of rules, we were working on a classifier system where, to estimate, how a recruiter would react to a given client, an interviewee for a call center. What we figured out was they love women, for those call center jobs, because a lot of the recruiters are women or for whatever reason, so now your model is accurate, but now it's sexist, so, you have things like that that come in, or, you have hallucinations with the LLM type stuff. How do we think about that? What are some of the dangers with this technology? Obviously we don't want to let it, out of the box just yet, in autopilot mode. What are the things you guys have seen?
I can talk a little bit about that. I think it depends a lot on what the computer models are going to be used for, right? Like, is someone trying to get a rough impression of something, like of, scenery, or of like, give me, the rough spark notes of this book, or is someone trying to dissect a legal contract, right? And then there's going to be all sorts of issues with that. So I think how tight these things have to be depends on what the customer expects and what kind of the end use is. I forget, or the company, I think it was an airline actually, which is great for this podcast. Someone was talking to their chat bot and got it to agree to like refund something or do something against their policies, right? And then they took them to court on, and it was like, well, your service thing said this, and so you have to abide by it. So I think anytime you're getting into like legal area or safety or things like that, I think it needs much more scrutiny, and I think people need to understand what they're trying to use it for, and what the risks are when they get into it. I'm sure there's analogies for LLMs in there.
And Rod, I think that just make the point again about trust, right? I think that if you place too much trust in some of these models, you're setting yourself up for failure to some degree, right? So some of them are great, they're accurate, but they do hallucinate and they do come up with wrong things. And if your level of trust in the model is that its answer is going to be correct, all the time, then that's probably too much trust, and could make a mistake. So I think there's a healthy balance that needs to be put in place, especially when you're testing certain models that you want specific results from. Make sure that you are employing prompts in a way that are going to generate responses that are going to be more accurate than others. I think that's one of the giant pitfalls we have with those.
So I remember the days when the issue of ethics came into AI before language models. I think there were issues of generating images that they had the wrong label, and they were kind of offensive, associating people with animals, or being, sexist in terms of the translation always referring to a man, and it could have been a woman. And people were upset, but I think there's a more optimistic way to say it. Generally, I think it takes about a generation or more to remove biases from people. You need a generation to get it out of the work environment. It's very hard to do that with people, because you don't have that much authority. But fortunately, with deep learning models, we have a lot of control, if you want, to reduce that and actually remove it. First of all, we know that where it's coming from. It's coming from the training data. So people are working, the more we're working towards creating better and better training data, we are eliminating that. And there's all sorts of research kind of like removing, that kind of bias. Now, it's interesting. People like these anecdotes that they are fancy and buzzy. The airline lost, I don't know, maybe $1,000 for agreeing to sell a ticket at the discount price. But have they actually measured how much money they've lost because of other errors that human customer support has done before? So I think it's a little bit unfair. But I wouldn't be surprised if in the future the bots are going through the HR training we all do periodically, every year about harassment and bias and hostile policy. So they'll be watching videos and examples. Maybe there will be companies generating materials to test, but or train them. But there's a lot of I think there's a lot of awareness and effort to reduce that.
What else? Let's get off the LLM. The world's a little bit bigger than that. What's next in machine learning? What are you guys reading or hearing, and what are you looking at? Next. What's the next cycle of interesting innovations that you're hearing about or watching? Nick, I know you go to a lot of conferences. What are you hearing out there?
So, I think if we talk about language models, they are great. And, it's been, 2 years since ChatGPT broke the barriers, even less than 2 years, a year and a half. It was actually in the middle of the biggest conference in AI. I think they did it on purpose. And it's, since we're talking about anecdotes, I landed the time it was a Wednesday, I think November 30th, I still remember they announced that. And within a day or two, nobody was paying attention to the conference and everybody was talking about ChatGPT. So but the biggest problem is the energy. Okay, so people are trying, now that we know what we can do, immediately. It's like the combustion engine. We invented it, we made it faster, and then we spent like the next 50 or 60 years like trying to make it more efficient and consuming less gasoline and make it lighter. So there's a lot of stuff to be done on the hardware side and on the algorithmic side in terms of getting into the essential. And I think, obviously there's the race of AGI, which, not many companies can work on that, have the bandwidth and the budget to do that. But right now, we're going to spend the next years trying to reduce the cost and make this more of a commodity, because it's still expensive for most companies to actually use them. And I do expect a lot of business innovation. Whenever a new technology comes, it takes a few years to actually find how to use it. When electricity came, people couldn't understand why they should, take their steam engine and put electric motors that they required another steam engine to produce the electricity, and it was producing less power. And it took about 20 years to realize that they don't need one engine. They can build 100 motors that they can spread everywhere and scale their production. That idea took about 20 years, to find out how to use an electric motor versus a steam engine. Now we're working with the low-hanging fruits, which is, customer support or human-computer interaction, but we still haven't seen a business that wouldn't have existed without language models. We know that Snowflake wouldn't have existed without the cloud technology. We know that Amazon wouldn't have existed with web. You can't build them, it's embedded in that. But we haven't seen a company that could not have existed without language models. It's like language models first. So I think we expect more innovation on the business side.
Joel, what are you reading? I know you're kind of in computer vision. What's hot there? What do you got your eye on for the next great innovations?
There's a few different things. On the more researchy side, it's interesting to see that the segment anything model and we've seen a few models recently where they've been describing like, hey, type in text and it can find things, and sometimes that works and sometimes that doesn't. But I think that stuff will be really interesting when it starts to really work. The other thing that's going on is just this constant push of data is getting cheaper and cheaper, imagery, LiDAR, satellite, all these things. And so companies are getting all this data in, and then there's this huge issue of just digitizing it, right? Like, where is everything? Telco's trying to figure out where all the stuff is on their lines, and they have old PDFs, and usually they have a person out with a clipboard or maybe a tablet nowadays. But if you can drive a truck and have picking up 3D imagery and all the LiDAR, like how can you pull everything out of that and then fuse it into the customer system? So pretty applied type stuff is more what I'm interested in, but there's just costs just keep coming down and everything keeps getting cheaper and cheaper. And then people are like, hey, it was so cheap to get all this data. What do we do with it? Right. It's classic big data, but in kind of a different format. So that's kind of what I've been into lately. And then just the overall context, like scene graphs and that type of stuff. Like, you know, if we have a telephone pole, what's attached to it, what's near it, is there a house, all this other, there's hundreds of different things that can happen, right? So trying to understand and pull that information up so people can do design and make decisions. And maybe computers will be doing the design eventually, but I think that's still a little ways out.
Well, you mentioned like a semantic layer. You guys feel like that's going to be a thing in the future? We have these building block models that are good at certain things. Plugging them together.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think definitely, like, you get enough object detectors and different things, and you pull that together, and then you have the existing databases and that type of stuff. I think that's definitely where it's headed. Right now, there's a lot of effort in just making sure you can classify everything really accurately. But then the next logical step is to build that up.
What are you seeing, Kevin? What are you reading about, and what's kind of on your mind for the next evolution?
Yeah, I read a lot of stuff on AI and what's going on in the world, and my focus might be a little bit different than Nico's and Joel's. But I mean, typically what I focus on for clients is practical application of what currently exists, and I have built models for some clients, but primarily my focus is on that practical application side of things. A couple of things that I'm really concerned about that are going on is the sort of the legislation that's being tossed, you know, the comments about legislation being tossed around. I think this is a very, very slippery slope. You know, I think there's a lot of unfounded fear about AI being dangerous right now. I think, sure, you can have scenarios where it certainly is, but I think in its what people have access to right now, I'm not seeing it. I think that we have to guard against AI becoming the playing field for AI becoming limited to very large companies in the government, right? I think that if legislation is not approached very carefully, we could eventually box out smaller companies where true innovation happens. So I read a lot on AI legislation that's going on. Also read a lot on just the market in general. There was a piece that came out a couple days ago. I think it was Sequoia, the VC firm, that came out saying that, in order for there to be ROI on the investment made in AI to date, it needs to generate about $600 billion in revenue, and it's the same sort of thing that got set up back in the internet bubble that I was, fortunate enough to be a part of. But that whole thing fell apart because the revenue just didn't meet expectations, right? So are we teeing ourselves up for the same type of thing where you've got lots of people using this, but they're using the free versions, tons of investment pouring into it, and is the bottom going to fall out at some point? Is the bubble going to burst? And another area that I pay a lot of attention to is ethics, AI ethics. And for me specifically, it has to do with training data. So from a healthcare perspective, is it ethical to use even anonymized PHI to train a model, right? Is it ethical? Is it something a company should do? And there's no clear answer there, right? But I think those are questions that should be asked. But I think there is a clear answer when it comes to creative content. Several years ago, when image generation first started coming on the scene, there were people in the art community saying, "Hey, this is ripping off this artist or that artist," and unfortunately for the fine art community, there's not enough. It's not big enough to get a lot of attention, right? But as soon as it started working its way into the music world, which Todd, I also have a history there as well.
Yeah.
But I absolutely 100% think that people whose content is being used to train models should be paid for that content. If it's not public domain, then there should be some sort of a royalty system or something very similar to, say, like Airplay or something like that, where people license their content to be trained, and it's just like licensing content to be used on as background music in a TV show or something like that. The creation of the content that these models are trained on is a tremendous amount of work, right? And it's a a labor intensive process to get these things from ideation to a finished song on Spotify or something. And if people can just download those and train models that can generate similar content at will, I don't think that's right. So those are three areas I pay attention to. And one thing I do want to mention that I read is Mark Andreessen has a really nice Substack, and he covers a lot of things on his Substack around AI ethics, around legislation, and I highly recommend that as reading material to anyone who's interested in where AI could possibly go from here.
I have a comment here. You said something very interesting, Kevin. So, you probably remember the days where the content providers or creators were really struggling, like newspapers, publishing industry. And all of a sudden, we realized that, wow, this is such a useful content. Everybody wants to train language models on books and on New York Times. And now we're kind of like on a stalemate over there, because the biggest problem is we can't really price that. So I don't know, HarperCollins, just bringing an example, or Random House, they want to give their content, but is 1 million fine? Is that a fair price? Is OpenAI going to make 100 million out of that, or is OpenAI going to make 500,000? So it's not worth it. So attribution, it's something that you asked before. It's a research problem. Like, if I can attribute my token generation or my image generation to my training data, that means that I can price. I can make a link, so I can give money back. So I can encourage people to share data with me. So from a research perspective, this is catching up as a problem. Now, I also wanted to supplement my previous answer. There was a paper last year showing that we're basically running out of training data. Like and in several cases, we don't have training data for complicated tasks. Okay, so we can have a lot of more LiDAR data, for example, from stations that Joel mentioned, but we already had enough of those. We need like different types of data, like more variety. And people have turned into simulation. So simulation is becoming very big. Simulators are coming very strong. And in some cases, what people have realized is that with simulated data, you can train language models to make predictions in constant time. Okay, you mentioned before, Kevin, that you use the language model to do some scheduling with a few people. Well, right now you can you can generate thousands of optimization problems, solve them, train a language model, and you give it a new problem, and immediately it gives you a solution which is close to the best or pretty good enough. That is super big. Now, they've actually, there's some work that they took the generative synthetic classification data, they fine-tuned the model, they pre-trained the model, and then they gave some new data and say, well, I give you 10,000 data points, predict the 10,001, what's going to happen. So basically build a scikit-learn, if you want, since we worked on that, you mentioned. In fact, the scikit-learn author is actually working on problems like that, where you pre-train a model and you build classifiers instantly. You can build optimizers. There's a famous paper from Meta called A-star search, where they prove they can train, with A-star search maze solving, and then you give a new maze, boom, it gives you the new answer.
Very cool. It's going to be interesting to see what the next round of innovation is. I got a readout from a investment fund that specialized in AI over the last 5 years, and they basically say there's two things. There's kind of three categories. Two of them they don't want to invest in. One of them is you're so big, nobody's going to compete at the scale of OpenAI. Like, that's just too much money. Nobody wants to spend that kind of crazy money to get into the market for something like an AGI or something like that. And then anything that's like just another wrapper on Chat GPT, just A, counterparty risk, B, it's not necessarily innovative. So I think those kind of things are not fundable anymore either. And then kind of what's in the middle, I guess, Nick, kind of goes back to your, your comment on, we haven't really seen the first business yet, or maybe they're coming out now, of something that would not have existed prior, without this new LLM technology, as an example. So it's going to be interesting to see what's in that middle category of not completely, research, brand new research, but very practical entrepreneurial application of a solid new technology.
I think there is a bet over there. Before even that, people think that we're going to have the first single employee unicorn startup. Like there's a bet whether you can use, OpenAI or language models in general to build a company that's going to be worth 1 billion without even having to hire, have a co-founder. So that could stand as a company that would never been able to exist without the language model. So there's this direction which is reducing personnel, but we haven't. I mean, there's this going back to what I mentioned before. If I have a system, we can do predictions in constant time. Planning, if you want, reasoning at constant time. There are some applications, but still, I don't know if we have, if that is a central component, and without that, you can't do it. We can always think about the medicine, the pharmaceuticals, that's something we didn't touch, but that's also very big, finding new proteins and new drugs with AI. That's also possible.
Yeah, it seems like there's a lot of innovation in medicine, for sure. And that's kind of in Joel's field of computer vision.
Yeah. Yeah, I spent a lot of time working on electric batteries, so electrochemistry, and there are companies that were using different, I don't know if it was even machine learning, but different techniques to figure out what to mix and make very small batteries with, and then test them out. Because at least in electrochemistry, usually the order of things is someone figures out something that works in the lab, and then there's a bunch of papers afterwards explaining why it works. It's usually in that order. It's the opposite of how you think the world should work, if you're coming from this perspective. But I think, and it gets into ideation, right? Like being able to ideate and hear different pharmaceutical things to try, because there's so many different possibilities, and it's so hard to understand how the molecules and stuff fit together. And the machine learning doesn't understand it either, but people are guessing, the machine's guessing. If you can get a lot of guesses out there and then try it in the lab, you can get more done. Pharmaceuticals is a whole nother level, though, because you've got to deal with what you tested on, right? Batteries, you can always charge them and discharge them on machines. I think it's going to come down to somebody's going to have the right use case, and then they're going to be like talking with someone, and it's going to line up, and they'll be able to use AI, some sort of form of it for that. I don't know what that use case is, but yeah, that's how I think it'll play out. I mean, it's obviously people are going to make a lot of money wrapping things too, and OpenAI is going to be OpenAI, right? But it's these very specific use cases in between that I think are where the bets should probably be placed if you're that.
I mean, I wouldn't underestimate the huge gains we have in productivity right now. And if you think the accelerated innovation, I mean, we talked about drugs, but I know they're using it right now to improve the efficiency in nuclear fusion. Like, imagine if, there's a new DeepMind paper showing how to make fusion stable based on, with language models. That could be huge, and that's productivity. And think about the Copilot right now, saving thousands of man hours for people, coding right now. I do think, though, that there is a gap over there. Like if we go back to what we know, like the web, how many versions of PHP and JavaScript until we eventually converge to a language where we can build web apps? We do miss. I'm actually actively working on that. We do miss a language framework for creating intelligent applications with, data sitting on a knowledge graph in a database and a language model. Okay, LangChain is the first kind of, or Llama Index is the first approach, but we need more. It's more heavily side on the language model. It doesn't really, we need a sequel for that. We don't have that.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, Nick. I think that, moving, if we're going to use models going forward, then, some sort of a standard or best practice is likely going to emerge about how do we structure content and other training data in ways that it could be easily consumed and understood by language models, right? Right now, there's in some cases not a lot of context. I mean, just on the coding thing, yes, it does some things really, really well. It does other things horribly. I asked ChatGPT a while ago to write me a code for a login page that uses SSO, and it got about a dozen things wrong, right? Not that I couldn't use what I got, but then now I'm debugging stuff that comes out of a language model rather than just really being more productive. And I think to your point, maybe that's about a more structured approach to how do we package up this content and this training data in a way that could be easily consumed by openly available models, or even by models that are used just internal to an organization.
So Todd mentioned something before about semantic layer, which is a great example. Language models, this is what I've realized, are basically forcing us to, tidy up our mess and our technical debt so that they can actually work. It's giving you motivations, like the candy, like your parents, like, if you don't tidy up your room, you're not going out tonight. Okay, this is what is happening. So a very good example is that when people are trying to generate from natural language to SQL. I mean, everybody's trying to do that. And very quickly you realize that it doesn't work very well. And it doesn't work really well because most of the enterprise databases are so messy. They have the wrong design. There's inconsistencies. Semantics are hidden, interplayed with the data because people were trying to be efficient. So but we know right now there's several, people who have tried that if you spend the time to create, a semantic layer, like an ontology or a conceptual model of your database, reorganize that in a way that it's simple and consistent and a human can understand, then a language model can do a much better job at understanding your intention. So, and the same thing I think it's going to happen with coding. People will go through the training data and remove from there a lot of code that it's messy and buggy, and they will actually be forced to train the models with cleaner data. Like, if you're a company, you might want to spend some time cleaning up your code base so that the language model can understand you better. In some cases, you can solve that with a semantic layer, which is your style guide, if you want. That's your semantic layer for coding.
I think I have some differing opinions there. We'll make it interesting, Todd.
Yeah.
So because of the different things I've worked on a lot of different, obviously imagery data. I've worked on a lot of product recalls where things are going wrong in manufacturing that people couldn't have anticipated. Or maybe they could have, it depends, right? But I think one of the problems with all these things is we have like our training data set, we have our nice data set, and there are all these things that we can't, it makes sense to us as a person, right? But there's all these things that we just can't anticipate and think of, right? Like, so when you start looking at images, when you go out into the world, there's all these different things that happen that you don't really expect, but you kind of keep a mental model of like, here are the things that I expect in my head. So like, we're trying to look at telephone poles. I'm going to keep coming back to telephone poles. So it's like this telephone pole is growing in a tree. There's a bunch of branches. Like, this probably wouldn't be on the drawing board of like things we'd expect for telephone poles, right? I think when you get into code in different companies, every company is going to have something weird that they've done somewhere, right? So it's not about maybe enforcing that everybody have this clean semantic. I mean, it'd be great, right? I'm not saying it's a bad thing. It'd be great if it was, but I think there's just so much stuff and so many, millions upon millions of lines of code out there that you have to, when you're working on building models and these things, you have to understand that there's just going to be lots of weird stuff that happens and that's outside of kind of the realms we're drawing things out. That's as philosophical as I get, but I feel like I spend a lot of time like going outlier chasing or trying to find all the different weird cases of things that could happen in consulting and in different environments, right? So I just want to throw that bit out there. It's not that we can make the world sort of conform to these things. We have to have a broader view of what could be out there.
If I can, I think Joel is right here, in the sense that the enterprise word is, the enterprise is your business, your database. So you have the power to to fix things. Now, when you're working with, with the real world, you don't have the power to go and trim branches or there is a way to do that. It just takes more work. In that particular case, you have to create real-time simulators. So you can use language models or, foundational models, let's call them provision, that they will create these scenarios, run them, and create more training data for you. Like in the enterprise world, for example, even what I said before, creating a knowledge graph, like an ontology, semantic layer, it's not easy even for humans to do that. But now we can use the language models to critique and help you build it. Yep. So it's a semi-supervised. Now, I think for the world that Joel lives, which is very different, I actually happen to have some
I don't have much control, yeah.
You don't have much control, and it does require for a bigger company to use, the Unreal Engine and create all these possible scenarios. Like you're working with nature right now, while I'm working with enterprise data, which is, much simpler, at least from, I have more control. I think it's going to come. It just needs more work over there and more computational power to understand what's going on. It's definitely more complicated.
Yeah, I like thinking about, so like we have language model, and then like RAG technique, retrieval augmented generation. So gluing a couple things that are maybe easy, or one of them's kind of a more machine learning, one of them's more traditional approach, or like a LLM plus a graph database. What is where you can have an ontology, or you can have those deep relationships, in a weighted graph, and then make sense of, you understand the question, and then you can like reason about it and then present an answer in an intelligent way. Like, there's got to be some interesting, play between different techniques here. Like Joel, you can find certain objects in a scene, so what, well, if there's like these two objects and that object in a scene, then that means something. Like if there's an orange tray in a food safety area, then that's bad. That means there's raw chicken or something like that, or tracking things in a scene and putting boundary boxes on them. I think there's a lot of interesting things that are going to emerge with those kind of techniques. Well, enjoyed spending time with you guys today, and kind of turn it back around to travel and getting out there in the world. You guys got any great travel stories you'd like to share in the Sky Lounge here? Nick, you want to go first?
Yeah, so I travel a lot to Greece, and Greece has a lot of small regional airports because of all the islands. And I remember waiting once to take off, and I see a guy with a rifle getting into a small car and speeding and driving around. And I asked the flight attendant, what is he doing? Why was he doing? He says, well, because there's a lot of rabbits in the area, he has to go and start shooting rabbits to make sure, or shooting at least to scare the rabbits, so that the runway was clean to take off. Okay. So we still don't have an AI system like the traditional rifle. Works much better in terms of enforcing safety in flights.
Joel, you got any cool travel stories?
Yeah, I have one. But Steph and I took a trip to Australia, and we flew from LA to Melbourne on an A380, and it's a very long flight. I don't know, maybe you guys are used to that type of stuff, but I'm not. It's like long enough that's like you're born on the plane, you've lived on the plane, you're going to die on the plane. So we get there, and there's a bunch of different jet bridges that unload an A380 typically. And so the jet bridge that's used for the coach class isn't working. So they unload the upper two classes first, and then they had everybody go up and walk through business class and first class. And it's like, oh, wow, this is really, really nice. It would have been nice to have found here. It's kind of like the last moment as you're walking off the plane. It was cool to see. But kind of a silly story about that.
Yeah, didn't know this existed. Might be worth a minute.
I was like, you've got beds up here? Like,
yeah, that's a game changer. Kevin, you got any cool stories? I know you've been moving around the country.
I don't know if any of them are funny or comical, but maybe I've just traveled so much in my career that I'm just numb to it at this point, but don't really have anything to add to that. Sorry.
What's your least favorite airport that you've ever been to?
Charles de Gaulle.
they have good food coming out of there. That's for sure.
Well, yeah, I was,
Only if you travel with Air France.
yeah, exactly.
They say that Charles de Gaulle is good if you travel with Air France. Anything else, you are,
When I was flying back and forth to Bucharest for a while, and I would fly Air France. I used to live in Atlanta as well. I lived there for 41 years, and Air France being a Delta partner, great food and great wine, of course. But man, that airport, the way it's designed, is not conducive to people connecting, even from the same airline. It's out of security, into security. But I guess it's just all part of the experience, I suppose.
Well, it's been great having you guys here, and I appreciate all the brilliant insights into AI and ML in particular. And bye for now.
Awesome. Thanks, y'all.
Hey, everybody. Great to be here. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you, Todd. And you guys.
Thanks for joining us in the Sky Lounge. Please like and subscribe to hear more from Tales from the Sky Lounge here and anywhere else you get your podcasts.